We've talked about the best Ford V8 engines and the best Japanese V8 engines, and then we even took it a step further and looked at the best German V8 engines ever. But we can't discuss the best V8 engines ever without first looking at Mopar. From the 340 small block all the way up to the 6.2 liter Hellcat engine, there have been a lot of great Mopar V8 engines over the last few decades. And while they're not as active in motorsports as they once were, Mopar is still a huge name in the drag racing world where power and consistency are absolutely key to winning. So let's dive on in and look at the best Mopar V8 engines ever. And when I say Mopar, I'm referring to more than just Dodge. Mopar encompasses Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram, and Plymouth. And for this video, we're really only looking at street engines, so we're not going to include anything like their NASCAR or motorsports engines. And to kick this off, we're going to start with the smallest engine on the list, which is the 340 small block. This engine was introduced in the 1968 model year for vehicles such as the Plymouth Duster, Dodge Dart GTS, the Roadrunner, and so on. At that time, the 318 cubic inch V8 really wasn't offering much performance, which was fine because the big block engines of the time did offer good performance. But that meant that there was one big category of Mopar engines missing at the time, which was a very high performance version of their small block engines. And that's exactly where the 340 slots into place. Right off the bat, it offered an impressive 275 horsepower and 340 pound-feet of torque, but many Mopar enthusiasts say this is underrated, and the real power figure is closer to 325 horsepower. You might be wondering why they would knowingly under-advertise the power output for a road-going car, considering advertised power is going to help sell the car, and the answer is actually really simple: NHRA. The advertised 275 horsepower was for NHRA stock classification to make it more competitive. You might consider this cheating to some degree, but that's just how the automotive world works. Compared to the existing 318 cubic inch engine, the 340 not only got that extra 22 cc's of displacement, but a dual timing chain system, larger intake and exhaust valves inside of higher flowing heads, a high-rise dual plane intake, larger carburetors, larger camshaft, improved oil pump, different crankshaft, and much more. Plain and simple, the 340 was miles ahead of the 318 in terms of performance. It was ready to go straight out of the box. And by 1970, we saw the advertised power bumped to 290 horsepower and 345 pound-feet of torque in the Challenger TA. But this is where things started to go south for the 340, as emissions requirements basically killed it in 1972. To meet these new emissions requirements, the compression ratio was reduced, the valve size was reduced, and much more, which resulted in a massive power decrease down to 230 horsepower and 290 pound-feet of torque, and by 1973, the 340 was retired entirely from use. Now you might think that power level sounds pretty bad for a 340 cubic inch engine, but just for reference, the 360 cubic inch engine from the same time frame output 175 horsepower and 285 pound-feet of torque, so that power level out of a 340 is not too bad at all. And the interesting part about the 340 is that it is the only small block engine from this time frame that was offered as a performance-only engine. Other small block engines such as the 273, the 318, and the 360 had high performance versions, but they were all based on a low performance version, where the 340 never had a low performance version. It was a high performance version right out of the gate. It's sad to know that the 340 had such a short lifespan due to emissions, but the bright side is that a lot of the high performance 340 parts were then used on a high performance version of the 360 later on, which helped bump the power on that application from 175 horsepower to 245 horsepower. Now that takes us back in time to 1958, when Mopar introduced the new 413 cubic inch Max Wedge engine, which I have to say is kind of a weird name for an engine, but I'll explain it in a bit. What makes this engine interesting is that this is the first version of Chrysler's raised block or RB design, and for a short time, the 413 was the most powerful engine in the entire lineup. It made its initial appearance in Chrysler's New Yorker, Imperial, and 300 series, where it stayed until 1964. The unique wedge-shaped combustion chambers are what gives this engine the aforementioned and kind of strange Max Wedge name. Overall though, the 413 Max Wedge had quite a few different components as compared to the normal 413 and offered quite a bit more performance. More specifically, the Max Wedge uses completely different cylinder heads with 25% larger ports and bigger valves. It also comes equipped with a unique high-lift 300-degree camshaft, double valve springs, a new intake manifold with very long intake runners for improved performance, twin Carter 650 CFM carburetors. Inside the 413 Max Wedge, you'll find forged connecting rods, 11-to-1 or 13.5-to-1 forged pistons depending on the specific version of the engine, and a baffled oil pan. Strangely enough, when it was equipped in Dodge cars, it was known as the Ram Charger 413, and when it was equipped in Plymouth cars, it was known as the Super Stock 413. Depending on the compression ratio of the engine, the year and application, power ranged from 390 horsepower up to 415 horsepower. And more importantly, the 415 horsepower version offers an even more impressive 470 pound-feet of torque. And I know modern engines might make that power figure seem bad, but you have to remember this engine was developed and offered in the 1960s. And that takes us to the even larger and even better version of the Max Wedge 413, which is the Max Wedge 426. And as the name implies, it is the bigger engine. This larger version was introduced in 1963, and it used a larger 4.25-inch bore to help reach that larger displacement, and was offered with 3 compression ratios of 11:1, 12:1, or 12.5:1, depending on the configuration. While the performance of the larger 426 Max Wedge was marginally better than the 413 cubic inch Max Wedge at 425 horsepower and 480 pound-feet of torque, it served as Mopar's main performance engine until the introduction of the 426 Hemi. And what's crazy about these Max Wedge engines is that from 1962 to 1964, you could equip them in quite literally any Chrysler B-body car. The 413 and 426 Max Wedge engines remain competitive to this day in stock drag racing classes, which really just goes to show how impressive these engines were at the time and what Mopar engines were capable of when performance was put above all else. And that takes us to arguably the most important Mopar engine of all time, and that's the 426 Hemi. This is the engine that helped them become such an iconic muscle car producer in the United States, and more importantly, helped solidify them as a powerhouse in American motorsports. The 426 Hemi was the backbone of Plymouth and Dodge Motorsports efforts in the 1960s and helped them dominate NASCAR and NHRA from the second the 426 arrived. The key to the 426 Hemi's success, well, it was the new hemispherical cylinder heads, but they weren't really new. In fact, this was really a rendition of some work that Chrysler had done in the previous decade. The new 426 Hemi maintained the 58.5-degree valve positioning of the aforementioned earlier work, but with massively increased displacement, different deck height, and different bore spacing. The unfortunate downside to making an engine this big and this badass is that it was really heavy. In fact, it was one of the heaviest engines that you could get at the time. And what's even crazier about the 426 Hemi is that it was introduced in 1964 as a competition-only engine. And we didn't see the street version of this engine until 1965. But between the street engine and the competition-only engine, they share the same rotating assembly. So that means your street car is quite literally getting the same rotating assembly of a race car. The biggest thing that separates the street engines from the race engines is just a more mild camshaft that's a little bit more streetable. On top of the motor, we saw dual quad carbs, and inside was a 10.25:1 compression ratio. All of this, paired with really any lack of emissions components or regulations, allowed the 426 Hemi to produce 425 horsepower and 490 pound-feet of torque. Although again, many Mopar enthusiasts say this is underrated, and the real number is closer to 450 horsepower. This time around, they supposedly kept the advertised power a little bit lower than what the car actually made in order to keep insurance companies happy, as advertising a 450 horsepower car in the 1960s would have been a little bit crazy. Unfortunately, this wasn't exactly a cheap option, so it's a pretty rare thing to find, and it's certainly the most sought after Mopar V8, and understandably so. It was produced until 1971, and it's hard to argue that it isn't one of the most important American engines of all time. Alright, enough with the dinosaur engines. Sure, they're cool, they make a ton of power, and they're very interesting, but let's take a look at something that was built this century, and we can start with the 5.7 Hemi. When Chrysler decided to revive the Hemi name for improved marketability with their newest V8 engine that they were developing in the early 2000s, they ended up kind of messing up the details. It has the Hemi name on it, but the combustion chambers in the 5.7 liter heads aren't nearly anything like the Hemi heads found in the 1950s and 1960s Mopar Hemi engines. This engine was released in 2003, and it was meant to complement the existing 5.9 liter Magnum engine, and it was initially offered in Ram trucks. Despite the Hemi badge on it being kind of a gimmick, this has been one of their most successful engines to date. Initially outputting 345 horsepower and 398 pound-feet of torque, it is a pretty decent engine right off the bat, but it was then modified heavily in 2009 with the addition of revised cylinder heads, intake, variable camshaft timing, and multi-displacement system, which offered improved mileage by utilizing cylinder deactivation at cruising speed. Interestingly enough, the new modified 5.7 liter Hemi was known as Eagle internally amongst Chrysler, and this rendition of the engine outputs 395 horsepower and 410 pound-feet of torque. The 5.7 liter Hemi is most notable for its dual plug setup, as well as the introduction of variable camshaft timing and variable displacement technology. It's since been proven as a very versatile and long-lasting engine that's been used in the Charger, the Challenger, Ram trucks, Jeep SUVs, and so on. That takes us to the elephant in the room, or the the cat in the room. I don't really know. Either way, the Hellcat engine was Mopar's last attempt to take back share from GM and Ford with their muscle cars, and the Hellcat motor will go down as their last performance V8 engine as they begin moving towards electrification of their lineups. And this truly is the ultimate evolution of the modern Hemi engine. It's the peak of it all. And while it's easy to hate on Hellcat engines for seemingly being overrated and slow, that's simply because modern Mopar platforms are very heavy. The motor itself, though, is a very impressive feat of performance, outputting anywhere from 707 horsepower all the way up to 840 horsepower over its near decade run on the market. The design for the Hellcat motor actually comes from the 6.4 liter Hemi and not the 5.7 liter Hemi. With a decrease in displacement and a lower compression ratio, they are able to construct an engine that safely survives 11.6 psi of boost pressure from a pretty large 2.4 liter twin screw supercharger. The Demon variant features quite a few major modifications, including a much larger 2.7 liter supercharger that allows it to output 840 horsepower on 100 octane fuel. And then there's also the Red Eye edition, which uses the Demon's larger supercharger but at a lower 797 horsepower. At this point, it's been used nearly across the entire Fiat Chrysler lineup, finding a home not just in the Challenger and the Charger, but also the Jeep Trackhawk, the Ram TRX, the Durango SRT Hellcat, and hopefully one day a Hellcat Pacifica, but that's a long shot. Some honorable mentions that I wanted to include in this video but didn't have time to actually add to the video include the 360 cubic inch small block, the 383 cubic inch B engine, the 440 cubic inch RB engine, and the 6.4 liter Hemi. Mopar has put together quite a few very impressive V8 engines dating all the way back to the 1950s, but that won't last much longer as they move towards smaller motors and electrification. If you think there's anything I forgot to add to this video or anything you want to add, be sure to drop it down in the comments below and smash the thumbs up button while you're down there if you enjoyed the video. Be sure to also get subscribed so you don't miss out on future videos. Check us out on Instagram and TikTok, and I'll see you guys in the next one.